My name is Ione Delafield, and I am 68 years old. People often call me meticulous, the kind of woman who alphabetizes her spice rack and still irons pillowcases. I don't see it as perfectionism. I see it as care. After 40 years as a librarian, order has always been my comfort. The quiet way I show love. That morning, the sky over Tacoma hung low and colorless, the kind of gray that presses on your chest. I was standing by the kitchen window, trimming the stems of a bouquet of white lilies. They were for my daughter, Mara, her graduation bouquet. She'd told me the university hadn't confirmed the schedule yet, so I was ready to call and ask. The flowers were fresh, their scent clean and faintly sweet, filling the room with a sense of occasion. When Mara answered, her voice was brisk, distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "I was just wondering," I said, "when the ceremony is, should I bring the flowers? Or—" There was a pause, a light laugh, the kind she used when she didn't want to sound unkind. "Oh, Mom, that was yesterday. It was just a small event, only close family." I don't remember breathing after that. My hand stayed frozen around the phone while my eyes caught on the bouquet, water dripping from the stems onto the counter. On the refrigerator door, the printed program from the university, the one she'd left behind last month, fluttered slightly in the draft from the vent. Only close family. For 3 years, I had paid her rent every month, sent checks for textbooks and tuition gaps, covered her car repairs, her winter coats, her doctor visits. I had told myself I wasn't enabling. I was investing in her future. And yet, when that future arrived, I wasn't even invited to witness it. I set the phone down carefully on the table, afraid it might shatter the fragile silence hanging in the room. The lilies looked too bright against the dull gray morning, as if mocking me with their purpose. I poured myself coffee I couldn't taste and sat there until the cup went cold, staring at the unopened envelope of her latest tuition receipt. Somewhere inside me, a small, deliberate calm began to take shape, the kind that comes only after a clean break. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would start adding it all up. The next morning, light seeped through the blinds in thin gray ribbons. I hadn't slept much, but the kind of exhaustion I felt wasn't the kind that asks for rest. It asked for proof. I cleared the kitchen table, pushed aside the cold lilies, the empty cup from yesterday, and reached for a yellow notepad from the drawer. Years in the library had taught me that when the world stops making sense, you start by organizing it. I drew a line down the middle of the page and began to write. Rent, $750 per month. 36 months. Books, $300 per term. Car repairs, $1, $200. Doctor visits, $400. Extras, who knows? The numbers grew in front of me, methodical and merciless. I flipped to the next page, then another. By the time I stopped, the total hovered somewhere around $24,000. $24,000, the sum of love, guilt, and good intentions. Good. I reached for the small metal box under the cabinet, the one where I kept old documents. Inside lay the registration papers for Robert's car, my late husband's pride, a forest green sedan we'd bought the year Mara was born. The memory rose before me in full color the day I handed the keys to a dealer, signing the sale slip with shaking hands. Mara had been short on tuition, and I'd told her not to worry. "It's just a car," I'd said, though it felt like letting go of the last thing that still smelled like him. That same night, Mara had called in tears. "Once I graduate, Mom, I'll finally take care of you. You'll see." Her voice had been so certain then, so warm, that I had believed it completely. I had imagined a day when she'd come home in her cap and gown, when I would stand in the audience, proud and full. Instead, I'd been replaced by a stranger's camera flash, erased from the moment I paid for. I closed the metal box and set the notepad on top, pressing it down like sealing a wound. The pages rustled faintly in the quiet kitchen, the sound of everything I'd given being tallied at last. Outside, the sky was still the same colorless gray, but inside, something in me had settled. Not peace exactly, but clarity. And with it came the faint outline of a decision I hadn't yet named. A week passed in a strange kind of quiet. I didn't call Mara, and she didn't call me. The notepad with all the numbers still sat on the kitchen counter, half buried under yesterday's mail. Each morning I looked at it. The sting softened. I no longer felt the impulse to defend what I'd done for her, only a growing certainty that I'd done enough. On the 7th morning, the phone finally rang. Her name lit up the screen. For a moment, habit twitched in my chest, the old reflex to answer before the second ring. I let it buzz a little longer this time. "Mom," she said as soon as I picked up, breathless. The tone I knew too well. The rent's overdue. The landlord says he's giving us until Friday. Did you forget to make the transfer? Her words hit with the casual confidence of someone certain the answer would be yes. I almost admired it. The way she'd woven dependence into routine. But something in me had shifted some quiet lever I hadn't realized was there until it locked in place. "No, Mara," I said evenly. I didn't forget. There was a pause. Then, a small laugh, brittle around the edges. "Oh, okay. You must be busy. I just thought maybe you..." I cut in gently. The way I used to correct patrons who spoke too loudly in the library. "Didn't I tell you I only help people who treat me like family?" Silence. The kind that hums in your ears. For a moment, I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard her inhale, sharp and quick, before the call disconnected. The kitchen was still, outside. The gulls cried over the harbor, their calls echoing against the fog. I poured myself another cup of coffee. Dark and bitter, and this time, I finished it every last sip without guilt chasing it down. Later that afternoon, I opened the cedar cabinet where Robert's maritime books were kept. The air smelled faintly of salt and dust. I began to sort them charts, ship logs, histories sliding each back into place. The rhythm was soothing, the order steady. When I finally closed the cabinet, my hands didn't shake. The house felt lighter somehow, as if a draft had passed through and carried something heavy away with it. They came on a Sunday afternoon, without calling first. I saw their car pull into the driveway, the same one I'd helped them buy 2 years ago, and something in my stomach tightened. Mara stepped out first. Sunglasses on, though the sky was overcast. Devin following behind her with that polite half-smile that never reached his eyes. "Mom, we just wanted to talk," she said, brushing past me into the house before I could answer. The scent of her perfume, sharp and citrusy, lingered in the hallway. Devin carried a folder under his arm. They sat at my kitchen table as if it were theirs. Mara's tone was light, rehearsed. "You've been acting different lately. Forgetful, even. Devin and I just worry about you." I folded my hands, keeping my voice steady. "I'm fine, Mara." Devin leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "We know you mean well," he said smoothly. "But it might be smart to let us help with your accounts, just for convenience. You know, a joint management arrangement." He tapped the folder. "We printed a simple form, a power of attorney. Temporary. Just to make things easier." The words landed like cold metal on the table. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to contradict him, to say this wasn't what it sounded like. But she only stared down at her hands. "I appreciate your concern," I said, standing slowly. "But I've managed my life for 68 years without supervision." Mara's smile thinned. "Mom, you're taking this the wrong way. We just don't want something to happen to your money. That makes 2 of us," I said. Devin shifted. Uneasy. "We'll leave the papers here," he murmured. "Think about it. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt heavier than before. I walked to the counter where a spare set of house keys lay in a small dish, the ones I'd given Mara years ago just in case. I held them for a long time, then slipped them into my pocket. That evening, I called the locksmith. By nightfall, every lock on my doors was new. 2 mornings later, an email arrived from my old colleague, June Peters, the kind of woman who still sent handwritten cards at Christmas. The subject line read, "Saw this online, thought you'd like it." I clicked before I could think better of it. There it was. Mara, in her black cap and gown, radiant under a cloudless sky. On one side of her stood Devon, grinning. On the other, his parents, holding a bouquet that looked very much like the one still wilting on my counter. The caption read, "Proud to celebrate with family." For a long while, I didn't move. The photo filled the entire screen, bright and polished, like an advertisement for the life I'd funded but wasn't meant to touch. My first instinct was fury, that quick, hot pulse beneath the ribs. But it didn't last. Anger is loud. And what I felt then was quieter, heavier. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased. I closed the laptop and sat with the stillness, the way I'd learned to after Robert died, letting the ache settle until it became something I could live beside. Outside, wind brushed through the maples that lined the street, scattering the first leaves of autumn. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, my neighbor from across the way, Nell Brookhart, stood there holding a mug of tea in each hand. I'd seen her before on her porch, reading mystery novels or tending her geraniums, but we'd never spoken more than a polite hello. "I thought you might need a break from staring at screens," she said gently. "You looked alone." We sat on my porch as the late light fell over the harbor. Nell told me she was a retired nurse, widowed too, and that her son had once borrowed her credit card for 2 years straight. "Funny how love can turn into a bill," she said, half laughing. I found myself telling her about the graduation, the call, the locks. She didn't interrupt or pity me, just nodded, as if she already knew the shape of that kind of disappointment. When she left, the air inside my house felt different, not lighter, exactly, but less empty. There was a trace of warmth still clinging to the mug she'd handed me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't mind the quiet. It happened 3 days after Nell's visit. I was in the kitchen, labeling folders for my bank statements, when a firm knock rattled the front door. Through the window, I saw a woman in a navy windbreaker, a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Mrs. Delafield," she asked when I opened the door. "I'm with the Department of Adult Services. We received a report that you may be experiencing some confusion and possibly financial exploitation." For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. Then the words arranged themselves like books on a shelf. "You'd better come in." Her name was Ms. Palmer, and she was young, early 30s, with a neat bun and the kind of careful voice used for both children and the elderly. She perched on the edge of the sofa and began reading from her form. "We were told you've been giving large sums of money to family members and that your recent behavior has been erratic." I walked to my desk and brought back a stack of folders, setting them down in front of her. Rent transfers, tuition checks, every transaction labeled and dated. I slid another folder forward, and here's the part where I stopped. "You can see the pattern." She looked through the papers, eyebrows lifting slightly. "You're very organized." "I used to be a librarian," I said. "Order is how I stay sane." Next came the questions: medications, health, support systems. I opened the pill box I used each week: vitamins, aspirin, nothing stronger. My prescriptions were current, my pantry stocked, my bills all paid on time. By the time she finished her notes, the color had drained from her professionalism. "Mrs. Delafield," she said softly, "I'm sorry. This report appears to have been Misguided. Filed by my daughter, I imagine. I said. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. When she left, I stood by the door for a long moment, watching her car disappear down the street. Then I sat at my desk and searched the number for a senior legal clinic downtown. If my daughter wanted to turn me into a case file, I intended to make sure she never had the power to try again. The following week, I met with a woman from the senior legal clinic named Amara Wells, a calm presence with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice that carried no judgment. She listened while I told her everything: the calls, the visit, the report to the state. She didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, her pen moving quietly across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she said, "You've already done the hardest part, Mrs. Delafield. You've recognized the pattern. Now we put it in writing. Together, we drafted a short letter, clear, measured, and kind. Going forward, it began. I can offer time and emotional support, but not financial aid. Visits are welcome by appointment. Love remains, but boundaries stay." Amara helped me print 2 copies. I signed both. Steady-handed, the way I used to sign library cards for new patrons. One went into a file at the clinic, the other into an envelope addressed to Mara. I didn't add a note or a postscript. I didn't need to explain any more. Some truths stand best on their own. On the walk home, I stopped by a small hardware and garden store at the corner of Proctor Street. In the front window hung a set of wind chimes, their silver rods catching the afternoon light. The sound was low and even, not cheerful. Not sad, just steady. I bought them without overthinking and hung them on the porch that evening. The first breeze sent a soft, deliberate note through the quiet. I stood there listening, the tone lingering like breath between heartbeats. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon oil and clean paper. I made tea and placed the receipt for the wind chimes into a new folder labeled House Personal. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming something I hadn't known was missing: space, sound, and the right to decide what peace should feel like. The rain had already started by the time I reached the cafe on Pacific Avenue. Tacoma drizzle, fine and persistent, blurring everything into a watercolor of gray and silver. I chose a table by the window and ordered chamomile tea, hands folded to still their quiet trembling. Mara arrived 10 minutes late, shaking off her umbrella as if the weather had wronged her personally. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mom," she said, lowering her voice but not her edge, "Devon's hours got cut, and rent's due again. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Just one last bridge transfer, I swear." The phrase was practiced, one she'd used before, a bridge that always led back to the same place. I let her speak. The words came in waves: stress, bills, unfair landlords, fate. I listened, but my heart no longer rushed to fill the spaces between her sentences. When she finished, I took a slow sip of tea and said, "I can't do that, Mara, but I can offer dinner. I'll cook. We can talk." She blinked, as though I'd replied in another language. "Dinner." "Yes," I said softly. "No transfers, no loans, just time together." Her laugh was short and sharp. "You've really changed. You've stopped believing in family." I met her eyes. "No, I've just started believing in myself." For a moment, she looked younger, that lost, defensive face she wore at 16, whenever truth cornered her. Then her jaw set. She pushed back her chair with a screech that turned heads across the cafe. "You're unbelievable. I'll remember this." "Mom." She grabbed her coat and left, the door's bell chiming behind her like a final punctuation mark. I stayed seated, watching through the rain-streaked window as she crossed the street, her figure dissolving into the gray. My reflection hovered faintly on the glass, older, steadier, no longer waiting for someone to return. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of chimes from somewhere down the block. I finished my tea, cold now, and stood. The air outside was sharp with rain, but it felt clean. For the first time in years, walking home didn't feel like retreat. It felt like arrival. By early November, the air in Tacoma had grown sharp and clean, the kind that carried the scent of rain and salt from Commencement Bay. I'd started hosting small soup nights on Fridays, nothing grand. Just neighbors and a few old friends from the library. Nell always came early to help set the table, humming tunelessly as she sliced bread. The others arrived carrying casseroles, stories, and laughter that filled the spaces where worry used to live. We ate by the flicker of candlelight, the kind that softened faces and made even silence feel companionable. Conversation drifted from gardening to favorite books, to the absurdity of the city's parking rules. Every so often, the wind chimes on the porch stirred a delicate, metallic murmur that seemed to mark the hour more gently than any clock. When everyone had left and the dishes were stacked to dry, I stood by the window with a mug of tea, watching dusk settle over the bay. The sky deepened from pewter to indigo, and the reflection of the porch light glimmered across the wet street. That's when I saw the envelope plain white, tucked halfway through the mail slot. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I knew by heart. Inside was a single photograph Mara, smiling beside a small office desk, a company badge clipped to her blouse. Beneath it, a note. Got the job. I'll be okay. Thank you for everything. No demands, no guilt, just words that stood on their own feet. I sat down, letting the paper rest on my lap. A long breath left me, slow and quiet. Then I reached for a pen and one of my old library cards. I'd always loved the weight of words on something tangible. Proud of you. Always. I wrote, and sealed it in an envelope before I could think to add more. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The chimes whispered against the fading light, their sound neither happy nor sad, simply alive. I stepped out onto the porch, turned on the lamp, and watched its warm circle fall over the front steps. Freedom doesn't mean shutting the door, I murmured. It means choosing when to open it.